panel discussion. So Granby Racial Reconciliation in partnership with Nourish My Soul welcome you here today to our panel discussion, Food Justice is Social Justice. Through the support of Hartford Foundation for Public Giving and First Church and South Church of Granby, we are offering an honorarium to our panelists today, and we're very grateful for their participation to help educate us about this particular issue. Our invited panelists are Jen Albertine, Ana Alicia Cruz, Mark Fiorentino, and Sarah Hill. And they will introduce themselves in a moment. And prior to that, I would like to introduce our moderator for this evening, Granby Racial Reconciliation and co-host of Granby Racial Reconciliation member and co-host of Radical Thursdays podcast, Kenya Moni. Again, thank you for being here tonight.
Hey, so welcome everyone. Thank you again to all of our panelists for joining us. So before we get started, can everyone just go one by one and explain once again who you are and your organization? Just keep it to like a 1 sentence little brief explanation.
You want me to go first?
Sure.
So I'm Mark Fiorentino. I'm very grateful that I got invited to participate in the panel. I am on the board of the Friends of Holcomb Farm. We're a non-profit organization whose mission is to preserve and operate the farm in West Granby. And a big part of our mission and our work is to provide food grown at the farm to communities in need in Granby and the Farmington Valley, and actually in a number of other metropolitan areas in Connecticut. So we're very proud of the work we're doing.
I'll go next. Can you hear me? I'm Annabelle Dinsey. I'm a Granby resident and I coordinate the Farmington Valley Granby Food Bank here in town. And that's my interest and my connection to this group. I hope to learn something and share what might be helpful to you.
I'll go next. Hi, I'm Jen Albertine. I have two roles that brought me here. And so the first one is I am the Climate and Land Justice Specialist for the Mount Grace Land Conservation Trust. And so we primarily service the area of north central Massachusetts, otherwise known as the North Quabbin region. And then my other role is I'm a co-director and co-founder of the Holyoke Food and Equity Collective, which is just across the border from Connecticut. And so we are an anti-racist community organization that is working to create better access to healthy food in the city of Holyoke by building food sovereignty. And so we do this in every level from policy change to gleaning. And our goal is to really generate health, racial, and economic equity in our community.
Wow, I don't know how to follow that. Jen, that was awesome. My name is Sarah Hill. I'm a community network builder at Food Share and / Connecticut Food Bank, and we are the food bank for the state of Connecticut. I have the privilege of facilitating hunger action teams across the state where local community members and service providers get together and we develop and implement local solutions to empower our neighbors to become food secure. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess I'm up. So I am honored to be alongside such awesome panelists. I'm really excited. And this is the first time I'm getting to meet you, Jen. I'm really thrilled by your bio. And hopefully we can talk offline. So my name is Ana Alicia Cruz. Most people know me as Alicia. I have she, her pronouns, and I currently steward land that was Tonks's land. And I'm a nutritionist and the executive director for Nourish My Soul, which is a nonprofit that works to plant and cultivate seeds of food justice through our youth and build sustainable and connected communities.
Perfect. Awesome. So we have such an incredible group of 4 panelists. I'm so excited to ask everyone questions. So the very first question, I do have specific questions for each of you, but the first one that I would like to ask to everyone is, and we can just go in the same order that we started in. For you, what does a just and sovereign food system look like, and how are you and your organization working towards that goal?
Well, so if I get to go first, I actually think access is part of the key issue. And it, although I can't take credit for this because it was named before I got involved at Holcomb Farm, the naming of our program Fetch Access was intentional because it's the program is meant to address the struggles that and the barriers that people have to accessing fresh, locally grown produce, which include obviously racial barriers and geographic barriers and economic barriers. And so for us, we try to focus on that issue of access in the work that we're doing.
I think I'm next. So that's a loaded question I have to start with, right? So, for me, it looks like one where the farmer is valued rather than our corporate profits. And it's a food economy that really centers the well-being of the smaller local farm and those food producers that work on those farms. And so it's also a system where everyone has equal access to affordable, healthy food, fresh food, and land to grow that food if that's what they want to do. It's an important part of that. And it's also important to note that a just food system isn't one that's separate from our other systems, right? Meaning we need livable wages, we need affordable housing, we need affordable healthcare. That's all interweaved into a just food system. And then finally, the last thing is just a system that operates in harmony with the earth, right? That we're not so extractive such that we are preventing our ability to grow food in the future. And so my two organizations are working on this. So Mount Grace, I'll put that hat on first. So I was hired specifically for kind of rematriating land to indigenous populations, and also to make sure that as farmland is turning over in the next 10 years, that we're having a larger portion of that go to Black and brown farmers. Because right now in our region, our farmers are 100% white, and that's not okay. And then also we work not only to conserve farmland, but also to work on our farming economy in our area, right? Without farmers, we can't have farms, and they need to be able to survive and have, a good economic system that works. And so we're working on, helping farmers markets be successful. And we helped create a co-op in our local area so that farmers can actually bring their food to the co-op to be sold to the public. And then my work with Holyoke Collective. So we do, immediate needs. So we do gleaning and food redistribution, but we also operate a diaper bank, right? Because that's another part of the whole system. And then we also are building food sovereignty. So we have been building raised bed gardens in people's backyard all this year. And we also worked with a local farm to provide seedling shares. So they could purchase a group of seedlings with their EBT or their food stamp benefits. And those seedlings that came, so in Holyoke, let me backtrack a little bit. Holyoke is predominantly Latinx population. And of that, I think it's 42% off the top of my head is actually Puerto Rican. And so sofrito is a combination of a bunch of herbs and spices that is a base to a lot of the foods. And so in this food share, this plant seedling share, they were able to get everything they need for sofrito minus the garlic, because that's a little bit harder to grow within this growing season, to do this. And so so far we've had 65 families that have bought the seedling shares. And then we so far have built about 10 garden beds in people's yards, and we're still working on that. It's a process. And then we're also working on policy change, and I'll talk about that a little bit later with one of the other questions. All right, I'll pass.
Now, let me step in. I feel like I'm out of the loop here. I have an organization that is tied into the town social services process where people.
Hi,
access.
Annabelle.
Yep.
I'm
Yes.
sorry. It's so wonderful that you're here.
Yeah.
And I should have thought to invite you to be part of this panel discussion since I work at Farmington Valley VNA as well. But we do have the 4 panelists that we invited.
Yeah.
So maybe at the end, if we have
Oh,
time.
that's fine.
So I do
It's okay.
apologize for the total lack of planning on my part. So
That's fine.
thank you
I'm
so
not
much.
offended.
All right. Yep. No worries. Bye-bye.
To follow up on the question of like a just and sovereign food system, I put in my notes, empowering farmers to connect with the community, enhancing indoor farming, and providing nutritious food year round. We have a very short growing season. How can we expand on our system? And personally, like, I shop at farmers market, so I love your idea with the seedlings. I wrote that down. And as Food Share, we connect with local farmers to purchase local produce, and hunger action teams support growing initiatives like grants to do indoor hydroponics and aquaponic systems, and just to empower people to grow their own food, get excited about it. We did a test series that I think it was 4 tower gardens fed like 60 families or something with fresh produce. So just thinking out of the box. Thank you. Pass.
Okay, so it's tough being last on this panel. All right. So for me, my objective is to move into just really focusing on food sovereignty, because for me, when I think about food justice, it becomes tangled with all the other unjust systems that we have, and it puts someone else in power and in control over your food and our systems, and us as individuals lose that power and that connection to our land and to our food, where it comes from, how to grow it, how to prepare it, how to share it, and you're putting that power in someone else's hands. So really, when I envision our ultimate goal, like when I'm out of a job, it will be when everyone has control over how their food is grown, where they're getting it from. It's transparent from seed to plate, and they have a say in all of that process. Unfortunately, our food system is, like I said, so entangled with everything else that it's really hard to try and pull that apart and say that this is going to fix it and that's going to fix it. Really, the only way that we're going to fix it ultimately is by putting individuals back in control of it. And then we have control over our health, right? The health disparities become obsolete because people can then choose the healthier foods, and economic disparities also go by the wayside, because growing your own food is like printing money. What is it? Ron Finley, who coined that, the garden gorilla. So yeah, that is I'll keep it short, but briefly, that's my vision and where we should be headed.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to ask each of you around 2 personal questions that's personal to your organization and your role in your organization. If we have time, I may ask you a third, and then we'll have some time for our audience to ask you some questions. So I will start with Jen. So my question is, how can we provide opportunities to those groups who have been historically denied access to land and land ownership?
Yeah. So I guess first I would like to, start off with saying, and this goes off of what Alicia just said about power, right? One major thing is to take the power away from white supremacy, right? And put it back into the hands of people that are most affected. And so, there's also the people that are most affected by a problem are the ones that are, most likely to have the best solution to fixing it. And so, 100% respect that you're doing this panel, but I also noticed that most of the panelists are white, right? And so that's a problem. That's something that we need to change. There's a lot of people that are Black, Brown, Latinx, Indigenous that are out here doing this work, and we need to really uplift their voices and make sure that, they're getting the stage to talk about what they're doing. And so, with that, I'd like to highlight the work of the Northeast Farmers of Color. I don't know if you guys have heard that. They are a group of farmers that came out of feeling excluded from traditional farming conferences, and they decided to create their own. And so they recently made a land trust out of that. And so, the purpose of that is to make sure that right as this farmland is turning over in the next 10 years or so, we have aging farmers, and so that land is going to turn over, that this farmland is going into the hands of Black and Brown farmers and Indigenous farmers, and making sure that it stays within those hands for perpetuity, right? So it's always in the hands of Black and brown farmers. And so I really encourage everyone here that's listening to this panel to look them up. They have a wonderful website. If you can, donate money to them directly. They also have on their website a reparations page where you can actually directly donate money to a farmer of color. So they might be asking for money for seeds or for soil or for tractor repairs, or maybe they're looking to buy land. And so, reparations are a huge part of that. Money is power. And so if you are able and willing to, or your friends are, encourage them to give some personal reparations in that way. So that being said, I think, a major way that we need to give more opportunities is to change policy, right? Demand that your public officials actually undo policies that perpetuate systemic racism. Right now, there's a bill that's being passed in many states that is trying to protect against heirs' property losses. And so that's how many Black farmers in the United States lost their land. If they did not have a will, and several descendants were then given the land, if any bank or another party of interest had a portion of that hand down of the land without that will, they could force a sale. And quite often they forced that sale for well under what that value of that land was, even if the other family members didn't want to sell it. And so this new bill that's being, I think 17 states have adopted it. It's on the docket in Massachusetts right now. I'm not sure what's happening in Connecticut. I meant to look and I apologize. But support that bill, because that would stop that from happening. That would prevent one person like a bank from forcing a sale. And if the sale does happen, it has to happen at the value of that land. They can't lose money that way. I also recommend you check your local zoning laws and understand how your zoning laws perpetuate whiteness in your neighborhood or in your town. There's a lot of things like not having multi-family housing on a property that has really excluded a lot of low-income people from living in particular areas, right? There's code for that. Small town rural charm, that's code for let's keep it white. And so I encourage you to really look into that. Bigger picture, the farm bill, that needs to be majorly overhauled. It is a bill that supports large industrial farms. And it doesn't matter, what color your skin is. If you're a small farmer, you are excluded by the farm bill, but we see even further prejudice against Black farmers. There's a history of USDA loans either being denied to Black farmers, or if they're given to them, they have very high predatory interest rates on them. When there has been relief, it's gone to white farmers. For example, that fiasco that happened with Trump and his trade deal, and all the farmers lost all their money. All of that money went to white farmers. And so, it's important to note that that's happened time and time again. With the most recent stimulus bill, there was actually a debt relief written into it for some of this predatory and discriminatory loans for Black farmers. It passed through the stimulus bill, and before it could get paid to Black farmers, a federal judge stepped up in the interest of some angry white farmers in the Midwest, and they stopped the payments from happening. And so even though the money was approved, it never has yet to get into the hands of any of these Black farmers that are suffering from these awful loans. I said it again, but it's really money. We need to have better grant funding. We need to have better access to low interest or no interest loans for Black farmers, so they can actually afford to buy the land and also buy the equipment and have some kind of support. There's not a lot of generational wealth that we see with white people, right? So I just, for personal context to that, I grew up in a low income family. I was poor, but I'm also white. And so I have a house that was passed down from generations to me, which is not something that was given to a lot of Black people in the United States. And so look into that. And so Leah Penniman, who I highly respect, she's from Soul Fire Farm, and I've attended workshops with her. And one thing she's asked us to do is know your roots, know where you came from. And that's not, to look at it from a place of shame or trauma, but to really understand what happened in the past, and what can you do to heal? How can you do it better than your ancestors before you did, more equitably, more just, and participate in a different way, but know your history and own it, right? And so that's really important. and then, as I said, like, support the people that are doing it, right? So Northeast Farm is a color, Soulfire Farm is another awesome place you can donate money to. There's a lot of them around. Just Google, you'll find a whole bunch of them. What else? Also, you guys are here, right? That's great. You want to learn. And so as you learn, pass that knowledge on to other people. If you read a good book, tell your friend, have your friend read it, discuss it with them. But don't stop in just the unlearning. Take action after that. You have to do something to change it. We can't just sit and learn. We have to, just have to change it. And so, lastly, last thing, I've been long-winded with this, is make sure that we have, Black, Indigenous, and people of color in positions of power. We should have people talking about the Farm Bill. We should have people on our federal, our state, our local governance that are actually making policy and having things to say. Distribute the power. So I guess that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you. You said some incredible stuff. And one thing I will say, you mentioned Soulfire Farm, and Alicia mentioned that they do have community work days. I had the lovely opportunity to go. It was extremely cold, but it was a very eye-opening experience. So I would maybe go in the winter or the summer when it's a little bit less cold, but yes, I did love it. So my next question is directed to Mark. And my question is, Fresh Access partners with the Hispanic Health Council. What has been a learning lesson for you when interacting with individuals from a different background or life experience?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me that question and not the one about being an attorney. So thank you for that. That's actually a good example for us. Our partnership with Hispanic Health Council goes back a number of years now. And in the last few, we've been able to grow the work we're doing with them in a couple of different ways. One is we're providing more food than we did in the past. And second, we've improved both our capacity to get the food to them in terms of how we get. The way it works with the Hispanic Food Council is we get it to them, and then they take it and repackage it and distribute it amongst a number of their community centers, primarily in the North Hartford area. But the lesson we really learned with working with the Hispanic Health Council is how valuable it is to listen. And to listen to our partners and to listen to the needs of the people that they're serving, and not just assume what their needs are or assume what we're doing is actually working with them. So every year we survey our partners and ask them what worked well, what are the foods that we're growing that people found a capacity to use and used mostly, what did they struggle to use? Because some of what we grow at Holcomb is not staple stuff, and it takes some learning to learn how to prepare and preserve it. And so the short answer is, what we learned is we can do a lot better work when we spend time talking to and listening to our partners, and through them the constituents they're serving, and adjusting as we go.
I love that. I think, and anyone is free to jump in here, but I think that's an incredible, important lesson, especially when dealing with sensitive topics like food justice and racial equity. But I also just think, as a general life kind of idea, to really take that into consideration, I think is very important. So the way that you guys kind of center that around your values, I think is excellent. So my next question goes to Alicia. And so you have designed various programs that center around the goal of using nutrition education, community-based agriculture, and youth empowerment to change our food system. How have you been able to incorporate racial awareness into those goals to push racial equity as well?
Okay, so that's honestly, we use food as our kind of tool to combat racism, honestly, because they're so interconnected. We can't solve one without the other. And so most of the communities that we work in are predominantly white. And that actually has some purpose to it, because I think that white folks are the ones that need to do the work, and they need the awareness. People of color know what they need and they know what's going to make it right, and they don't need me swooping in and telling them the right and wrong way to eat, or none of that stuff. And as a white presenting woman, I'm who am I to talk to them about racial disparities, racism, any of that, what they face every day. So it was intentional that we are predominantly in white communities. And we do get students of color, and actually more so now that we are identified as a safe space, I think, for them. We get a lot more students of color that enroll in our programs. We do it from a young age. We start at age 6 is when they can begin enrolling in our programs. And it's very subtle. We use food, introduce them to different ethnicities, cultures, and how food connects all of us. And then as they move into our junior chef program, which is middle school, we have more in-depth conversations about that. Like for instance, one of the towns that we're in, the school system does not have right now they have a lunch program because of the pandemic, but up until then, they did not have a lunch program. So students were there all day and they didn't have access to food. And so we talk about, what does that mean for kids that can't afford it, or kids that are coming in from other towns and are spending all day either on a bus or in school and they don't have food at home. What are we doing? And so they get introduced to that concept. And then in high school, we really dig in. So we start to really analyze food systems and how they connect with all the other systems. We talk about, some would say unintended consequences of policies, but others would say they're intentional outcomes of policies, whichever way you want to look at it. But, how something seemingly good can have a really negative impact on certain communities. And we do that because I really want these students to then move on and be the next policymakers, and to have that awareness that something can look really good and shiny and great. And then if you don't look at it in the wider lens, and from different perspectives, how that's going to impact others that maybe don't look like you or have the same background as you. So our students spend a lot of time talking about that. Last year, it was actually a core focal point because of George Floyd and all of the things that happened. We really got to dive in, and our students started having more in-depth conversations about this, and opened it up to the community, more public facing. As you all were made aware, Kenya is the co-host of a podcast that centers around a lot of different injustices that happen, and a lot of them revolve around racial inequities in different aspects. I recommend all of you go take a listen to that. It's a great podcast. So yeah, we really study systemic outcomes, like how policy impacts outcomes, how that plays out in their own community. And a lot of the communities that we are in fall into that white savior mentality. And so we talk a lot about how detrimental that is, and how we actually have so much to learn from communities of color. And we should go into any kind of collaboration with that mindset.
Awesome, thank you. And so the final question of the first set is for Sarah. What is Food Share doing to get to the root of food inequity so that, as great as your programs are, they hopefully won't need to be a reliance for people?
Great question. We are looking at the bigger picture. So I always say hunger is a piece of the poverty pie, right? You need to have a good job, you need health insurance, you need housing, childcare, financial literacy. There's so many things. So we're looking at it like, if we just keep giving people food, it's not going to solve the issue, So we're looking at different wraparound services. Food Share recently established the Institute for Hunger Research and Solutions, which is directed by Dr. Katie Martin. And it's looking at the holistic solution. So it's providing access to healthy food, making it clear what is healthy and what is not healthy. It is doing motivational coaching, which is getting to the root causes of why there's economic, instability in this person's life. What are their barriers, and how can we get them to self-sufficiency? And then we, do choice. Like, if you're just like, here's a bag of food, there's no inspiring thing. We want to educate, we want to inspire. Like, you should have the choice to get your own food. There's dignity in that. We do connection, and just you get like a mentor, and you get to build yourself up with lots of different backgrounds. And then culture, which just like allows dignity and respect for people to have a safe space to get the services if they're interested. So moving away from just here's food, we want to make, ideally, I don't want to get myself in trouble, but like ideally in a great perfect world, we want hubs, right? Open 7 days a week. You don't have to go and just get groceries for 3 days. Like, normally pantries only provide food for 3 days. That's tough. That means you're going to have to go to multiple pantries if they have that in your area. It requires time and travel and all of these extra things. Why not have one place that's always open? You know the people, you can get your services. So that is where we are moving towards.
Excellent. Thank you. Sounds like a very bright future.
Kenya, can I follow up on that?
Yeah,
Because
go ahead.
I was struck by the phrase dignity of choice, and it reminded me of something that our partner Wheeler does. Same thing with Wheeler. We deliver the food to them, and then they provide it to their clients at their various different health and wellness centers throughout the state. But they call their clients customers, and they treat them as customers. So when we provide the food, we lay it out just as Sarah was talking to you, as if it's in a grocery store. And rather than give them, Wheeler doesn't give them a selection of the food. They go through and they pick the food that they like the best. And so they actually select it as if they were selecting it in a grocery store. So we're proud of their another lesson they taught us about when we give them the food, what's the best way to do it and to get people that dignity that Sarah was talking about.
Love that. Love that. Okay, so the next question will be to Jen. Sorry, I was just thinking for a second. Will be to Jen. And so, how have you experienced a culture of racism negatively impact those you work with?
So I'll tell my policy story now. So in Holyoke, that's where we do a lot of our work. So Holyoke has and this is again another loaded question, right? I'm giving one small example of many, and I could probably take the whole hour and a half to talk about this, but I'm going to try to sum up concisely. So Holyoke is segregated both racially and economically, and we can date that back to the time of redlining, right? But it's the same zoning laws that I mentioned previously. They're now holding that in that place, where again, we have areas of Holyoke that are rich and white where they don't allow multifamily housing, and then down in areas of low income and where we see predominantly people of color living, right? Those are zoned very strictly. And so one thing we wanted to do to increase food sovereignty was to allow people to have hens in their backyard. And so, right, as I said before, about 45% of our population is Puerto Rican. Hens are very important culturally, not just for food. So we introduced this ordinance during the middle of the pandemic last summer. We were hearing from community members that there's one very small grocery store in this area. They could not get eggs. Even the big grocery store, Stop and Shop, that's 2 miles away with no bus system. It's very hard to get to. Regardless, never mind in the middle of a pandemic, they just didn't have access to eggs, which were an important source of protein for people. And so we put in this ordinance. We worked with the city council to allow people to have 6 hens in their backyard. So no rooster, no more than 6. There was, set guidelines for how you were to do it safely. And so it seemed like it was a great solution to help food sovereignty. And we were met with such difficulty with the city ordinance people, the city councilors. There was a lot of racism, right? There was a lot of comments about claiming about these people can't keep chickens. They can't even take care of their yard. They're dirty. We're going to have disease outbreaks. Just every racial trope you could imagine around that was coming out in the public on these city council meetings. And so, right, we managed to push through this. We posted some op-eds. We called out the racism on the city council. When it was all said and done, they had put so many fees on the head ordinance. It was over $700 worth of fees just to go before the city ordinance, not even to see if you even got approved to have hens, right? $700. And so it became very prohibitive for the very people that we wanted it to help, right? To be able to have hens in your backyard for if you were food insecure. And so we ended up withdrawing our support of that. We have changed gears. We now have, we got some funding from the Union of Concerned Scientists, and we're actually holding public forums because this year is a city council and a mayor election. And so we're holding forums out in the open where we're asking these hard questions about food access, food sovereignty, systemic racism. And we're hoping that we're going to flip the city council and have a more progressive city council that we can then hopefully then pass, you know, not only this hen ordinance, but getting more community gardens in our city and everything. And so that's just one very small example of the amount of racism that people experience every day. But yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I think stories like this are so important to be heard, especially like for the majority of us live in Connecticut, but I mean, it happens everywhere, obviously. But I think like you're right over the border. And so hearing how severe these circumstances are, because I feel like sometimes we think like, oh, that would never happen anymore. I think there's such a important reality check for all of us that it's still so very important, which is also why another reason why I'm so grateful for all of you for joining this panel. So Mark, I love that you mentioned the importance of dignity a few minutes ago. So expanding on that, what do you think the most important issues that Fresh Access are tackling and why?
Well, I think I started off with my opening comments about access, but I guess what struck me so far in the panel discussion is our focus is so narrow on the bigger scope of what we're all trying to accomplish, right? Some of the other panelists are talking about long-term solutions and food sovereignty and independence. For us, we're trying to provide short-term solutions to bridge the gap to those longer-term goals, right? So we do have. So again, we provide food to people in different methods. So another way that we provide food through the Fresh Access program is working through the Granby Social Services. They identify Granby families who qualify based on whatever criteria they used, and they identify the families for us, and we provide for them every year free CSA shares. So they're treated just like every other CSA member. They come out to the farm. The idea was to actually connect them with the farm and they are provided much greater choice because when you come to the farm, you can actually pick vegetables and you can go out in the fields and pick certain vegetables. So we're trying to do both. That's our little picture of the world of how to take the smaller work we're doing. I shouldn't say smaller work, the narrower work we're doing in helping people with their immediate needs and expanding their capacity to understand where the food comes from and how they can participate in it. And at the same time, helping others who would have no capacity to get to the farm, even if we gave them the opportunity to come to the farm. So I think that'll be going forward for us. We're very proud of the work we've done. We've grown the program 7 or 8 times its size in the last 5 or 6 years in terms of the amount of produce that we're getting to people. But the next challenges for us, besides just doing that, is I would say twofold. One, and again, we learned this from talking to our clients. So a number of the clients or customers who get food through Wheeler actually don't have regular access to cooking facilities. So we are working with them to provide more grab and eat food for them. And we're also this year for the first time hoping, we're working with a couple of other local growers because we don't grow much fruit on the farm, we grow some melons and stuff, to actually purchase apples and pears and other things that we can. So I would say our biggest challenges are probably twofold. One is to continue to be able to do that. It's hard when you're a small nonprofit farm to be able to grow the type of food that multiple different constituencies need. And the second is to work our way into the bigger picture. Again, we're filling our niche, but our niche doesn't include the bigger picture stuff in helping solving some of the more systemic problems. So we're going to need help in that regard, honestly.
Thank you. Love the introspection. Alicia, what has been a perspective that you have gained through your work with youth that has translated into navigating the current racial climate?
I have so many stories that I could share. I'm going to share one that really changed the trajectory of my thought process. So as I said in the beginning, I'm a nutritionist. So I got into this work from that perspective. I had been a nutritionist in private practice for a long time, and my motivation for entering nonprofit work was actually seeing the inequities in access due to economics, but I knew that racism was an issue, but I hadn't, at that point, I was a lot younger. I hadn't made those connections yet. And also I knew that youth were the ticket to making sustainable changes. I was mostly counseling adults who had longstanding habits in their diet, right? And to try and undo that in our medical system, the way it's established, is impossible. I would get 3 15-minute visits with someone who's pre-diabetic. I can't undo their lifetime of habits. Someone needs to mute. There. Okay. So then when I started doing the nonprofit work, it was through the YMCA, and I was the nutritionist for all the Greater Hartford YMCAs. And I started this, it was our high school leadership group. It was actually started with the YMCA. So I had from the ground up groups in all of the Greater Hartford YMCAs. So there was Granby, there was Hartford, East Hartford. Those were our primary, we had large groups there. And one day we were putting in a community garden, which has so many beautiful stories that I could tell you about. It's in the north end of Hartford, Winter and Green, and I highly recommend people go check it out. It's in public housing, huge success story. But when we were doing it, it was a lot of work. It had been neglected. There were, dead pets that were put onto that property. There was bags of garbage. It was cleaning all that out and then working the land, getting it into a condition where we could start growing food. And one of the youth in our Hartford program turned to me with anger and said to me, "Miss Alicia, I ain't your slave," and threw his shovel down and walked away. And that was a huge aha moment to me. I hadn't even, honestly, that's not my history. And I hadn't connected the dots between people of color and their history with the land and that relationship and how hurtful that can be without the proper conversations around it. And so that moment changed the trajectory of our program completely. We all sat down, we stopped working, and we sat as a group. There were probably about 45 young people present that day from the various communities. And we spent 2 hours talking about the history of Americans and the land, and what that meant. By the end of that 2 hours, there was tears, there was hugs, it was great. It was a very healing moment. And obviously that changed everything about our program. So.
Awesome. Thank you. Love that story. So I am going to ask everyone 3 questions. So this will be the last of the second set, and then I'll ask everyone one more personal question, and then a final question, and then a Q&A. So Sarah, as an organization, you also take donations from major corporations. How have you vetted those organizations to ensure that they line up with your values?
So 2020, it was a weird year, right? Like a lot went down. And one time we got a donation from self-declared Proud Boys. What a time. So, and they went to our partner programs. And so we, denounced that we did not accept their donation. It got written up in the Hartford Current. We put out a statement that in accordance with our gift acceptance policies, we do not accept donations from anyone that is labeled a hate group and all of those fun things. But just like, what a time. It came up and they tried to make it like, oh, we're doing good in the community, and it took a turn. But I can say also from a food standpoint that we have been moving our priorities towards accessing healthy food. So previously we used to accept large donations of soda and all that Halloween, Easter candy, all of that good stuff. The peeps we used to get were insane. And now we do not solicit those large donations. It shouldn't be when your only food access is a pantry. It shouldn't only be junk, so we're really using our purchasing power to do fresh, healthy produce. And that's how we're vetting, our donors.
Thank you. Love those answers. So Jen, this is the last personal question. Have there been, and I know you've mentioned a couple, but if you could mention a couple more, have there been any cooperative efforts with local land trusts and food providers regarding access to land and BIPOC use of land?
Sorry, I had trouble unmuting myself. So I guess I'll start talking about my land trust that I'm a part of. I've been here for a little over a month, so I'm a brand new hire. And so they made this position that I'm in, the climate and land justice specialist, with the idea of making sure that we do better in our land access. And so I hope that other land trusts are going to do that in the future, but I'll just talk about, what we're doing right now. And so the work that I've been doing is I've been meeting with Nipmuc tribes right now, tribal leaders, and we're in the process of writing cultural easements for all of our Mount Grace owned land, such that they have rights of access for foodways, for medicine, for ceremony, for cultural education. And so, as we work with the Nipmucs, we're also hoping that they will then identify some of these properties that we own that are of particular value to them, that we could then transfer ownership back to them. And so, that's part of it. And so we're hoping, as we do this as with our own land, that we're hoping that all of our private landowners that we also hold their conservation restrictions for, that they follow suit and start to do it also, and write these easements that allow rights of use of the land of our, indigenous tribes that, we stole the land from, to be honest. And then the other part that we're working on is we have, a sector of our land trust is devoted to preserving farmland, right? And so we're working with farmers. So here in Massachusetts, in the next 10 years, about 1/3 of our farmland is going to change hands. Actually, less than 10 years. So that status was from 2016. So 3 years, right? And so, 90% of which do not have any successors written down for their land. And so we're reaching out to these farmers and helping them come up with a plan for their land. We're educating them about the lack of land ownership and Black and brown farmers. And so we're encouraging them to transfer their land to Black and brown farmers. And we're going to be working with Northeast Farmers of Color to do this. And so, we've already identified 6 farms. 5 farms are in the process. The 6th farm is actually have had an offer made on it already. And so we're hoping that that offer is accepted, and this group of BIPOC farmers will have this over 100 acres of farmland in our region. But I just want to highlight that it's important. It's not just as simple as giving land back to Black and brown farmers, particularly in the region that I work in, which is a predominantly white region. Right? You have to think about the racial climate of these predominantly white towns and the safety and community and well-being of our BIPOC farmers. And so, in addition to identifying land, talking to farmers, trying to get it sold at value to the next farmer, we're also on many committees in the community that are working on things like working with the local police departments to make sure that there's bias training and racial sensitivity training for our predominantly white police force. We're also, for example, this one group of farmers that is buying this land, we have offered to sit with them before the planning board in their small town to give them support that way and make sure that they're not met with any racism from the planning board. And then generally just thinking, how can we make our white communities more welcoming to non-white people? And then on top of that, as the people have mentioned, is, we also have to make sure that we have a local farm economy that's going to make their farm viable, right? We can't just throw land and say, hey, here you go, good luck, right? We have to really work on having this farm economy. And so, so we're working with, I mentioned this co-op, it's called the Quabbin Harvest. And so that is a co-op that takes the vegetables from the farmers and sells it. They also did food shares this past year. So they had food shares that people bought, and then they had food shares that people got for free, also through grant funding and also solidarity shares. Soulfire Farm does this a lot with their work. But so it's important to make sure we have an economy that allows these farms to stay afloat. And so, just to list some other people that I know that are working on this. So I think the first land trust to ever do something like this was the New Communities Land Trust. So they're a big one down south that has working on this stuff for a long time. We have the Freedom Farms. There's the Black Land and Power Fund is another kind of land trust organization. Of course, the Northeast Farmers of Color. There's also a Black Farmer Fund, but there are a lot out there. And so I wrote in the chat, Leah Penniman wrote a book, Farming While Black. I encourage you all to buy it and read it. And Anna, Alicia, that might help your kids to read it and look at it. But you can find on Civil Eats, on Yes Magazine, there are always authors of color, farmers of color that are writing about what they need and what needs to happen. And so I encourage you just to read and hear their voices. So, all right, that's it.
Thank you. Mark, your last question. You also partner with a wide variety of other organizations with the common goal of reaching seniors and the health impaired. Can you explain how the food distribution process works? So do you travel to meet them, or do you have a stand at Holcomb Farm where they come out to meet you? If you do have a stand, are there plans to possibly start a food delivery system so the food meets them instead of the other way around?
So as I said a little bit earlier, it's a little bit of both for us. We do both depending on our partners and their capacity and what's in the best interest of their constituents. We do have a farm stand. You should come out and visit it. We sell not only produce that we grow at our own farm, but this maybe is one way that we're contributing to the larger goals that Jen spoke of in terms of creating an economy that supports farms and allows them to foster. So we sell our own produce in our farm store, but we also sell products from local farms all throughout the area. So we make very little money on it. It's just an opportunity for them to get their products to customers and people who are otherwise coming to our farm. So you should go out and visit the farm store someday if you haven't recently. And then again, our CSA members who are identified by Granby Social Services, they come to the farm and pick up their produce just like regular CSA members. Our work with the Granby Senior Center, because they have the resources and they're local, they come once or twice a week and pick up the food and then redistribute it at the senior center. The same with our partner, Waste Not, Want Not. So what we're doing, we changed our motto for Waste Not, Want Not a few years ago that really increased both of our capacity to really help people. So years ago, Waste Not, Want Not got our waste, essentially. It was the produce that was otherwise going to go bad. And it was very hard for them to use in a systematic way that helped people because they got it on very short notice. And often it was stuff that they had a hard time planning and actually using. they cook a community meal and provide a community meal, as I'm sure all of you know, in Granby once a week. So again, listening to them and their needs, we do it completely differently now with Waste Not, Want Not. Every week, we allow them essentially to order off a menu of what vegetables we have that week or produce. And then they not only now are able to plan their meals and incorporate the food into their meals, but they're actually able to package some of it and allow people to take it home with them too. So and then again, with Wheeler and Hispanic Health Council, because their distribution centers are more widespread and their resources are a little bit different, we deliver it to them and then they deliver it to their customers based on the systems that they're using. So we're doing a little bit of both.
Awesome. And Alicia, your last question. How have you seen the intersection between food justice and other injustices?
That is loaded. Oh, let me think how to answer that. Well, food justice, if you don't have access to healthy food, then your health outcomes, they bottom out. So that's number one. Then also, I'm going to use that school as an example again, that they don't serve food during the day. So imagine you are a child. I'm going to use the stereotypical example, but please know that in this town itself, there are plenty of students that don't have access to food at home. Okay, but I'm using the example of some students that come in from Hartford only because they're on the bus so long. So you have a student that is getting on a bus an hour earlier than the kids that live in that town. They're coming in. So a lot of kids at that time in the morning aren't eating breakfast anyway, just because they haven't fully woken up. They're like literally rolling out of bed the last minute and hopping on the bus, right? So even if they had access to food, they're likely not eating breakfast. Then they arrive at school and there's no food. And you're a student, you're a child, you're not allowed to leave campus. You have to stay there. So you are stuck. And they're there until school gets out. Maybe they do an after school activity, maybe not. And then they have a long ride home and they're going home perhaps to an empty kitchen, or maybe there's some things that they can eat. So now they're perpetuating this cycle where they don't have access to the nutrients that they need for their brain to function, to form and function properly. So they're not doing well on test scores. They're probably misbehaving, falling asleep in class, not able to pay attention, not getting the test scores. So now we have this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So we have this child who's coming in from out of town, right? Looks different than other people, has a different background. They're misbehaving, they're getting labeled, then they're getting tracked and targeted. That child's not going to be successful. And then all of the kids around them, right? So this is why I actually don't care for these programs, because now all of the kids around them are taking this mindset of, you don't belong here. We were doing you this favor, allowing you here, and look at what you're doing. Like, you just don't belong here. And it perpetuates this racist thought pattern. So that's the racial inequity. That's how it plays out. That's one of many examples how it can play out for racial inequities and, bullying in schools. Gender inequities, you've got a single mom who's working, trying to make ends meet and trying to put food on the table and making less money than her male counterparts, and also, trying to manage childcare and doing it all. And, that's another intersection with food justice. Then you have our laborers, right? So you have immigrant workers that come in. So you have migrant workers who are treated unfairly. They're not covered by the same labor laws. They sexually assaulted. They are poor working conditions, underpaid, not access to healthcare, and they don't have access to the things that poor Americans would have, right? So those are the examples that I have off the top of my head, but like it could go on and on. Even farmers, farmers themselves, like they're working these long days and oftentimes can't even eat the food that they're producing. They can't afford a loaf of bread from the grain that they grew, So there's just so much inequity in our system, and they're all intertwined. Environmental injustices, like we have poor communities subjected to, like we have pig farms in the South that are poisoning the communities in which they reside. We also have massive food waste problems, and where's that food waste going? It's going into landfills in poor communities instead of feeding them. It's ridiculous, the whole system, the way we operate and the way it's set up, it's systemically set up to target certain communities.
Thank you. And last but not least, Sarah, can you name a few practical ways that we can assist the Hunger Action Team within our towns to combat racial prejudices?
I would say attending, panel discussions like this, learning a lot, building these connections, working with elected officials on equitable policies based on the voices of what we're hearing in the community, create a collaborative space for like culturally relevant foods in our area. Like, I'm so tired of everyone being like, we just need to grow squash. And it's like, no, it's not what we need to do. That's not true in every community. And create educational content to like really like spread the message. Like, social media has really become a rocket during COVID, and like use this platform, use this time to educate the masses. We're building an audience. So really just educate, inspire, talk to someone about this event. It's really that interpersonal communications. Like, I could put a flyer up, but if you attended and you felt inspired, like tell one person. That will truly make a difference. Thank you.
Love that. Okay, and so the last question that I will ask all of you will be the same question. We can go in the same order as before. So we can do, I believe it was Mark, Jen, Sarah, Alicia. How have you positively seen racial equity impact your world within your How have you positively seen racial equity impact your world, either organizationally or personally? You're muted.
Sorry. I was going to say, at the risk of embarrassing your dad, I'm going to answer it for me personally. I followed your dad's advice, honestly. So after the George Floyd murder, whatever that was, just more than a year ago, I called him because he's a guy that I respect and trust, and asked him what I could do to try to make a difference. And he gave me very good advice that I try to share when people ask me this question, is to educate myself on the history that led us to some of the issues that we have now, and how that history is continuing to impact the things that we're doing and the things that we shouldn't be doing. And so I'm very grateful for your dad taking the time and being willing to give me that advice, and trusting me to share it and pass it on to others.
Thank you. Jen?
So I have two. So one has to do with the Holyoke Collective. So we are an all volunteer run organization. All of our co-directors are unpaid, but then, right, we rely on community members. And so we put out a call, and we had 125 volunteers sign up to work for our collective. They all underwent an anti-racism training with our collective. And over the last growing season, we gleaned over 50,000 pounds of food that would have gone to waste in farmers' fields. And we wouldn't have done it without the 125 volunteers that we have. And, they did this with this reckoning of Black Lives Matter and what was happening with George Floyd. And so I've seen, they're predominantly white people. Let me step back. The volunteers are predominantly white people. Not our co-directors, we're predominantly BIPOC people. I think I'm one of two white people that are co-directors of the Holyoke Collective. But it's been great seeing white people step up and have action and try to change the system. It's wonderful seeing the white people on this call And then the second one is really the power of reparations. I know I sound like a broken record. I think this is the 5th time I said this in this call. But really, whether it's personal reparations, whether it's support of federal reparations, whether it's debt relief for Black farmers, it has to happen, and it's very powerful. I have seen some Black farmers I know personally be able to buy a tractor because of these personal reparations, and it made their whole farm work. And so it's that understanding of people that have the power and the money, learning and being able to pass that money on to people that have been excluded from the power and the money in the past is something that's amazing. And so please support reparations. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Sarah?
So it's a difficult question for me because I see a lot of the negatives that happen with racism and everything, and like how like something positive. And so the only thing I can really think of is in East Hartford, we did a survey in the thick of COVID, and we were able to interact with people and understand what was happening in that moment. Like, what do you need right now? Like, historically, data is always a year behind, and we in the pandemic, like, we needed information quickly. So it was just like getting our community up together, lots of different personalities, backgrounds, races, and we connected with the community to build projects based off what they wanted to do. And one was grow their own food. And so we launched a huge bucket, program, because a lot of people in East Hartford that wanted to participate live in apartments and they only have a front porch or a patio, and that's it. And so based on all of that community engagement and all the students that came out to create those buckets, like it was incredible. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you. And last but not least, Alicia.
So much pressure going last, you guys. Okay. So I actually get to, I'm on the flip side from Sarah. I get to see a lot of really beautiful things. Working with young people, there's a lot of hope, so much hope that happens in our conversations. And they have this idealistic passion that drives them. And that gets me out of bed every day. And that's what gets me through. That's what got me through George Floyd's murder, and all of those things, is listening to these young people and their vision of the future. Putting it like into perspective in another way too, I think white culture is so individualistic, right? So we are very we hold on to what is ours, that's yours, this is mine. I'm up here, you're down here, or vice versa. Like, there's power dynamics, there's you're separate from the whole. And I like to tell the story, so I am going to go back to that garden story that I kind of talked a little bit about earlier on Winter Green Street on public housing in North End of Hartford. And I had this, the youth that I was working with really wanted to do community garden. That was their project. We have a project that the youth focus on every year, and that was their project. They wanted to connect people back to the earth and growing food. And I had to test the soil and do all these things to prep while the kids were at school. There was things that had to get done. And I remember being out there prepping the soil, that my first experience, and a police officer kept stopping me and telling me to go home. I didn't belong there and I was going to get hurt. Very naive. And I'm like, I'm fine. I can take care of myself. I'm just getting dirt samples. I'm perfectly fine. Then some residents started coming out, noticing that we were spending time there, and they were talking to me and they were telling me, that it was dangerous and I shouldn't be there. And, I had this conversation with a group of them. We had them come out and we're talking to them about what we were doing and our hopes for it, for the land. And they kept saying, but people are going to steal the food and they're going to abuse this. And, you could get hurt working out here. And again, I said, if people steal the food, that means they need it, and that's good. That is what we are trying to do, is feed people. And we're trying to build a space where people know that they will have access to food. And there's no such thing as stealing from our community gardens. Like, this is to feed you. And also had the conversation with, we are, our groups are coming in and we want to build something in conjunction with you that you're proud of and that you can use, long term, and just call on us as you need us. Anyway, long story short, we were met with a lot of resistance at first for all of the reasons that revolve around white culture idealism and, like, this is my garden, I worked on it, you can't have any kind of thing, instead of like, I'm doing this for my community. By the end of it, we kicked it off. We taught them how to garden. We had some people step up as leaders. We stopped in probably only once a month throughout the summer. And it is such a place of beauty. Like, I still go there every summer. I didn't go there last summer, but other than last summer, I've gone there every year and participate. They have cookouts every weekend. They have people growing food from their home countries in all different crazy ways. They teach each other. They might not speak the same language, but they're, collaborating, they're communicating, they're sharing food together. And that, to me, is what communities of color do, right? They learn to rely on one another, and there's this sense of, we're in this together, and I'm going to lean on you because I have to. I have no other choice. And it's very different, and it's a beautiful thing to be a part of. And so that's the positive thing that I take out of all of it.
Awesome, thank you. So we do have a few more minutes. If anyone has any questions, you can just type it in the chat. But I would just like to say, once again, thank you so much to our panelists and for all of you joining to watch, whether this is live or you're watching the recording. And our goal is for these panelists to spark just another fire in you to continue the important conversations that each of these panelists started tonight, and maybe even possibly take part in one of these organizations or find a similar organization, or just another way that you can spread this awareness with food equity and racial equity and just all of the injustices that there are, because there's so many. Yes, and so Sarah put her contact information in the chat. If any of our other panelists would like to do that, then our participants can reach out to them if they so choose. But yes, I will wait a few more minutes for any questions. And if we don't, thank you so much again and have a good night, but we can wait.
I'm
Yes.
not sure I would know how to put my contact information in the chat. So you have it, and feel free to share it with people. I will put in this
Will
pitch.
do.
One of our goals is to make our board at Holcomb more consistent with the communities we serve, and to have better representation from the communities that we serve. So if you are interested in joining our board, or if you know someone who might be interested in joining our board, please reach out to us. That's an important goal for us as we go forward.
Awesome. So we do have a question that is from Rose Moaning, and it is directed to Jen. So she says, I listened to the 1619 Project podcast and heard the story of Black farmers, the Provosts.
Yeah.
I was incredibly moved by their story. How can a regular person learn more and engage in equity for Black farmers?
Yeah, so there's some great books out there. So as I mentioned, Leah Penniman's Farming While Black. There's also Monica White wrote a book called Freedom Farmers, which is another excellent book. Yeah, and so, ways to engage, reach out to these different organizations, and mostly money is what they really need, right? They have the framework, they have the people working for them, but they need the funding. Other ways you can engage is write to your politicians, your representatives, your senators, let them know how important, ending racism in the food system is to you. I know from my contact with my local public officials that, it's those personal letters that mean so much to them versus those templates you get. It's just mass templates of all the same stuff over and over again. So if you take the time to actually write a personal statement as to why that's important for you and send it to them, it's gonna, go way farther than those templates. So yeah, but just, I guess, the last thing, and I know Alicia mentioned this, but just white saviorism. You're not here to save anybody, and don't do this for your own advancements. Really, listen to the needs of the community and ask how you can support them, right? Rather than act like you can save them, I guess is the bottom line. Is really try to step away from that framework.
Awesome. And we do have another question from Anne directed to Mark. She says, I am curious to know from Mark whether listening to your constituents has changed or added to the types and varieties of vegetables grown on Holcomb Farm, like the sofrito herb mix Jen talked about.
We're not quite at that level of sophistication yet in terms of responding to the feedback we get, and it's hard for us, right? Because we have to build a farming plan around a lot of different communities, and including our own CSA share members. The battleship turns slowly for us sometimes. But I mentioned earlier some of the things that we have gradually over the years adjusted our farm plan based on the input that we get from our community partners. We are actively trying to grow and provide more grab and eat food that doesn't take a lot of sophistication or facilities to prepare. And as I talked about earlier, we're trying to work with other local partners in providing more fruit, because we don't currently do that, a lot of that in the garden. We have a common joke around Holcomb Farm that if you were part of the Fresh Access program 8 years ago, you got kale, and then some more kale, and then some more kale. So we've come a long way from those days. So.
Awesome. I don't see any other questions in the chat, so I will just wrap up very quickly. But if you do have, oh, Alicia, go ahead.
I would just like to plant a seed, for everyone in Granby, since we are an agricultural community, like maybe starting to shift the conversation about, how our land trust can support BIPOC farmers, and, conversations like that. I would love to see that happen.
Awesome. So thank you one more time. I'm gonna keep saying it to all of our panelists and to all of our audience. And also Sarah did place a TED Talk. I love TED Talks into the chat for all of us for our viewing pleasure and for us to learn. And if you do have any questions, you can contact any one of these wonderful panelists, and I'm sure that they would love to answer. And says, a comment for the group, not so much a question, but there is currently a coalition of Hartford-based farmers seeking land. They call themselves I Got Next. Would love to see Granby be their answer. So that gives us some more practical steps that we can maybe take a part of. So yes, have a great night, and thank you.
Great job, Kenya. Thank you.
You did so
you.
great.
Anya, you did an amazing job. And if
Thank
the
you.
team,
Thank you, Kenya.
Of
you
course.
panelists, and we'll be in touch. Thank you so much for your time. And yeah, and if the team can stay on, that would be great. I think Bob didn't see that. So thank you so much, Mark. Yeah. Bye, Annabelle. Thank you for coming. Oh.
Wow, Kenya, that was terrific.